They called her Hollywood's golden girl, a woman whose smile could outshine the brightest spotlight. But behind that golden glow was a secret the studios could never afford to let the world see. In July of 1948, the dream ended suddenly, quietly, and far too conveniently. Carole Landis, adored by audiences and soldiers alike, was found lifeless in her Brentwood home. Hours before, she had shared dinner with one of the industry's most powerful men. Hours after, a letter she was said to have written disappeared. The story the world received was polished and perfect, a tragedy with no villains, no questions. But those who knew her whispered a different tale, one wrapped in silence, influence, and a truth that refused to stay buried. She was the woman who knew something Hollywood couldn't hide forever. Carole Landis was never meant to be ordinary. Born Frances Lillian Mary Ridston in 1919, she grew up in small-town Wisconsin, far from the lights of California. But even then, there was something cinematic about her, a spark that refused to be contained by quiet streets or simple dreams. By her early 20s, she had already conquered the screen. 1 million BC turned her from an unknown into a sensation, her face instantly recognizable, her name printed beside headlines that called her the Blonde Bomber and the Golden Girl. She had what Hollywood worshipped: beauty, youth, and an untouchable glow. Yet what made Carole different wasn't her looks, it was her heart. During World War II, while many stayed home, she crossed oceans to perform for troops, singing until her voice broke, smiling until it hurt. To those soldiers, she was more than a movie star, she was the face of hope itself. But when the war ended, so did the applause. And in the shadows of her success, a quieter story began, one the cameras never caught, and one Hollywood would spend decades trying to forget. Carole Landis came to Hollywood with nothing but determination and a dream stitched into her heart. She was barely 16 when she boarded a bus to Los Angeles, chasing the kind of life that didn't exist where she came from. The city didn't welcome her at first, too young, too bold, too sure of herself. But Carole had the kind of energy that couldn't be ignored for long. She began as a chorus girl, then as an extra one of thousands, hoping the camera might stop, just once, on her face. When 1 million BC premiered in 1940, it did more than make her famous. It transformed her into an idea, the embodiment of Hollywood's fantasy of perfection. Overnight, she became the woman everyone wanted to see, and no one truly knew. Behind the flashbulbs and staged smiles, Carole remained grounded. She laughed easily, treated everyone from makeup artists to janitors with the same warmth. Her kindness was her strength, but in the world she entered, kindness was often mistaken for weakness. Still, for a while, it seemed nothing could touch her. She had made it the small-town girl who became the golden dream of an entire generation. Fame, for Carole Landis, was both a blessing and a cage lined with gold. The studios adored her face, her charm, her voice, but they also owned her. Every movement, every relationship, every word she spoke in public was measured and scripted. The woman who once felt free on the open road to Hollywood now found herself trapped behind its polished walls. Her personal life became the city's favorite rumor. Marriages that began in passion crumbled under pressure. Headlines painted her as unstable, emotional, too much. But the truth was simpler. Carole loved deeply, and in a world built on illusions, that was her greatest sin. Then came Rex Harrison, refined, married, dangerous. He was everything she was told to stay away from, and yet, she couldn't. Their connection was real, but it came with consequences neither could control. Hollywood's elite whispered behind closed doors, and the studios began to look the other way. For every new film poster bearing her name, there was a door quietly closing somewhere else. The same system that built her was now deciding how and when her story would end. By the late 1940 seconds, the golden light around Carole Landis had begun to flicker. She was still radiant, but no longer untouchable. Roles were scarce, studios were cautious, and whispers followed her wherever she went. To the world, she was a fading star. To herself, she was a woman fighting to stay seen. Her relationship with Rex Harrison became her anchor and her undoing. He was charming, brilliant, but always belonged to someone else. Carole believed love could change that. She waited through promises and denials, through nights that ended in silence and mornings that began with lies. Her friends saw the toll it took. Her letters grew heavier, her laughter less frequent. She once wrote, "Hollywood loves you until you need something real." The words felt prophetic. Behind the shimmering images of her on-screen happiness was a woman exhausted by pretense. She planned new projects, wrote outlines for films she wanted to make, but the industry had stopped listening. What she didn't know was that her story was already being written by others, a final act crafted not by truth, but by convenience. July 4th, 1948 Independence Day. While the city above her home sparkled with fireworks, the house on Cordell Drive was quiet. That night, Carole Landis hosted a dinner for Rex Harrison. Neighbors heard faint laughter, music drifting through the open windows, then only silence. The next morning, her maid knocked and received no answer. Hours later, Carole was gone. What followed was confusion and then control. A note she was said to have written disappeared for hours, only to reappear once the press was called. Harrison gave a statement and left the city, his career untouched. The studios closed ranks, issuing a story too neat, too rehearsed. Friends rejected the narrative. They spoke of a woman preparing for her next film, excited for the future. Her mother said Carole had called her the day before, full of life, full of plans. But Hollywood prefers endings that protect its own, and so the truth was buried beneath the glimmer of respectability. Carole Landis's final performance wasn't on camera. It was the story others wrote for her, one that left out the most important scene: her voice. In the decades that followed, Carole Landis became less of a headline and more of a whisper, the kind that lingers in the corners of Hollywood history. Her films still glowed with the same brightness, but now that light carried the weight of everything she endured. When people watched her smile on screen, they couldn't help but see the sadness behind it, a reflection of how fame can dazzle and destroy at once. Those who had known her never forgot. Fellow actors described her as generous, humble, incapable of cruelty. Soldiers from World War II kept her letters as treasures, reminders of the woman who made them feel seen during their darkest days. Her fans refused to let her story fade. They wrote books, curated archives, kept her memory alive in the quiet spaces where Hollywood's noise couldn't reach. Carole's legacy is not in how she died, but in how she lived. She gave light freely, even to a world that dimmed hers. And though the truth about her final night remains shrouded in mystery, one thing is certain. She became immortal not because of what the studios created, but because of what they could never take away: her humanity. Carole Landis's story stands as one of Hollywood's most haunting contradictions, the tale of a woman built by fame and broken by the silence behind it. She was adored by millions, yet abandoned by the very world that made her. Her tragedy wasn't simply in her end, but in how easily her truth was rewritten, reshaped, and sold back to the public as a polished illusion. Hollywood loves its legends, but it fears its truths. And Carole, with her unfiltered honesty and impossible vulnerability, was both. She dared to love deeply, to feel openly, to question the system that owned her image but never her soul. In a place obsessed with perfection, she remained painfully, beautifully human. Today, her name is more than a relic of the past, it's a reminder. A reminder of the cost of silence, the cruelty of control, and the courage it takes to exist in a world built on make-believe. Carole Landis didn't just vanish into history. She became the mirror Hollywood still refuses to look into. What part of Carole Landis's story stayed with you, the light she carried, or the silence that followed her? She was more than a star. She was a woman caught between truth and illusion, and her voice still asks to be heard. If her story moved you, share it. Keep her name alive. Leave a comment. What do you think Hollywood was trying to hide? Because every time we remember her, the silence loses its power. This is Fame and Shadows, where every star has its story, and every story leaves a shadow that never fades.